Now. Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for another town hall meeting. Um, these meetings are being sponsored by Hands-On Diagnostics, and we try to bring you guys lots of good information every day. I mean, I see people started asking questions here before even we start. Christina is really on top of your game. But let me guys give you, before we start, today's meeting will be mostly dedicated into answering questions, helping you understand a little bit more of the different options of the money that you can get from the third package, the third government package, CARES Act. We have with us also Bob Kowalik, who will be giving us some more specific data on the calculations that can be done. And we'll answer some more questions for you since he has studied this subject quite a bit. But before we start that, I would like to just make a mention to, let me just do something real quick. Is Tim here? Tim, I'm just making you a co-host, and if you can please keep approving the people, admitting the people in the room, you're going to start seeing people that want to be admitted in the meeting. If you can please go ahead and admit them. Click on the word participants, manage participants on the bottom of your computer, and you'll be able to be looking at these people. So I can deviate a little bit and go to my emails and find the emails from the APTA. I was in direct communication with upper management of APTA and specifically with the Vice President of Government Affairs. And the communication I have to give you today in regards to CMS is that it seems that the whole problem with CMS happened because the rule that CMS released was drafted prior to the president signing the CARES Act into law on Friday. Okay, I will be posting to you right now in the chat section something which is directly from the APTA. What APTA wants us to do right now are the following 3 actions, which I'm gonna post again. These are the 3 actions that they want us to do. And mostly, guys, it is the specific letter that they want us to send out as soon as possible. And I am going to post for you the link to go to the APTA website so that you can take care of these action steps, okay? All right, good. Meanwhile, let's start asking some of your questions in regards to the loan package. And let me ask, actually, Bob, what news do we have about the application of CARES Act? There are a couple of things that have been announced that perhaps you can shed some light on.
Yeah, So right now, banks are supposed to be able to start processing loans on Friday. Now, every bank's going to kind of arrive on the scene ready at probably their own pace, but SBA has put out a proposed application form to all the banks, whatever the government has to do to make sure banks have the funds available to share. Is being done. So the word that I have from my bank and from attorneys who are connected to all kinds of banks, and my bank is actually part of a statewide, what a lot of banks are doing is they're organizing into almost like co-ops of a sort, just, that's probably a bad term. They're grouping together to make sure that they're all in sync with everything. And Friday seems to be the magic date that stuff's going to start to happen with the banks. So I think anybody that I've heard whose bank is already kind of working with them, it's probably similar to what my bank's done with me, which is basically just said, hey, here's our application form. My bank happened to choose that exact form. Dimi just put up. It is the one that's on posted by the SBA. I can. Dimi has it there, so we could probably post a link to where you could download that PDF. And that, my guess is that most banks are going to just do this exact form right there. Since this is technically officially under the SBA, disaster loan program, so it's just it's an add-on, loan to that. There's still, they still have not come out with any kind of technical corrections. And just to piggyback on what Dimi just laid out there about APTA and, the whole fiasco around our procedure codes being approved, but we're not as providers, because we haven't been telehealth approved providers under Medicare. So, and we're still not. And until they add us to that, to the list of approved providers, we can't do telehealth. Doesn't mean you can't still see a Medicare patient for telehealth on a cash basis because it's not approved covered service. So, but as soon as that changes, then you might have to switch up in the middle of something. So, but the way that the government handles these things is through a process of guidance and then technical corrections. So guidance meaning trying to provide clarity on confusions, and there's plenty of confusions in the law. And then technical corrections become actual drafted language in the law. And so for us as PTs to be added to the list is going to require technical correction. So hopefully that can happen quickly, but that's also true for the CARES Act loans. And I've seen some questions already popping out about, can my retirement amount be included and all that? It's not a specifically mentioned part of the loan calculation. It's not specifically mentioned in terms of allowable use. So things like that, that are not in there may show up in a day or two or a week. But I think the general sense of things is that you need to be ready to act, to be in a position to apply. I believe the application is pretty straightforward and simple. The only piece of information that you need to have for certain to start the process with your bank is what your average monthly payroll costs are as defined by the average of the last 12 months. So it's a 12-month average of payroll costs. That number is what they're going to use, multiply by 2.5, and that's your loan amount. Now, if you did already take out an SBA disaster loan under one of the earlier things that came available since January 31st of this year, you can flip that principal amount into this loan and replace that loan with this loan. That's something that you should really look at doing because the typical SBA disaster loans don't have the same conditions and forgiveness and all that kind of stuff that this CARES Act loan does. So, just look at if you are one of probably a minority of people who acted really quickly and took already took an SBA loan for the purpose of helping to fund, payroll and that kind of stuff. You can't have both. You can't double dip, so to speak. So, you will need to kind of trade that into this loan. So there's only two components that go into the loan amount calculation, and that is that average payroll cost on a monthly basis, and if you have an SBA principal balance on a loan that was taken out after January 31st. Yeah.
Bob, a quick question so we can keep it also a little interactive. Somebody was asking, in terms of the payroll cost, whether you can include any 1099s you pay. That's one question, and then I'm going to pose a second question.
Okay. Yes, the answer is yes. 1099s, the way it's drafted, and this is definitely a gray area as to whether or not it includes companies that are 1099s, but individuals that you're paying as a 1099, like you have a contract therapist, that kind of thing is clearly intended to be counted. But as with all payroll costs, you can only count up to an annual run rate of $100,000 a year pay rate. So you as an individual sole proprietor, as a self-employed person, as a business owner, you can count yourself up to that $100,000 limit. So when you get to your loan calculation amount, if let's say you're paying yourself $15,000 a month, you can only count $8,333 a month for you. That's the number that equals $100,000 annual rate. So that's true for independent contractors as well.
Bob, along the same lines of the same question, let's say that you have an accountant and a bookkeeper, or let's say an attorney, your attorney and a bookkeeper. Your attorney, you pay your attorney, let's say, directly on his, in the name of his firm, right? But your bookkeeper, you pay them, you send them a check directly to their name. They are both independent contractors in a way. One of them was a legal firm that you pay. So you paid, I don't know, $10,000 to that legal firm. You paid $10,000 to a bookkeeper. The bookkeeper gets the money directly to their name. The legal firm gets the money on the name of the firm.
Yeah.
Would you be able to include both or only the one on the individual?
So what's clear in the law is typically under that scenario, the bookkeeper is a yes, the law firm is a no. Here's the way that you need to look at it. The law firm is going to claim its own loan amount and spend amount. And so if you were allowed to include the company that is an independent contractor on your loan and spend amount, then they're not allowed to claim the amount you pay them, right, in their own calculations of things. So the assumption is really that both entities are going to be doing the same thing. Each would need to do it for themselves. So in the case of your bookkeeper, she might not be going for her own loan, so you can include her on yours. They don't want you to double dip.
Okay, and somebody is asking, so if you pay an independent contractor more than $100,000 a year, we can...
$100,000 is the limit on what you include on the loan amount. Again, just for context, remember there's three parts to this. There's the math that goes into calculating how much you can borrow. That's based on your payroll cost times 2.5. Then there's the actual 8-week period following the date of the loan that you will spend loan money on. And you're allowed to spend money on payroll costs, rent, mortgage interest payment, and utilities. And so that spend amount is what a forgivable calculation is going to be done on to determine how much of that spend you don't need to pay back. And so the third piece is where you get into the FTE comparison of before and after, or during, right, this covered period. There's a term called covered period in the law. And there's two kinds of covered periods. There's a covered period for the loan in general, which is February 15th through June 30th. And then there's a covered period specifically to the loan forgiveness period. So there's a loan forgiveness covered period, which is the 8 weeks immediately following the date of the loan. So there's going to be some math done differently depending upon the period that you're talking about. So you've got payroll cost times 2.5 equals loan amount. Spend on payroll plus utilities plus rent plus a mortgage interest payment if you have that instead of rent over 8 weeks determines the allowable use. And then based on that total, you're going to do this two calculations, one around FTE change and one around wage change that would then be applied to your allowable use spend to determine how much of that loan you don't need to pay back. The FTE comparison is a one-to-one relationship. Any reduction in FT in the comparison period to the prior period results in a reduction of your forgivable amount. But on the wage, it's a 25%, you have a 25% kind of buffer, so to speak, before that starts to decrease the forgivable amount. Now, here's where I've spent the last several days really working on math modeling. And when you do the math on this, some things start to become clear that just by reading words on paper don't seem so apparent. Because the spend determines the forgivable amount of the loan. Remember, you've got an amount of money that's potentially forgiven, and then you've got a calculation that comes up with a percentage of how much of that will be forgiven. So you can't forgive money that didn't exist. So you have to spend the money to have it forgiven. So if you've lowered wages, even though you didn't maybe pass that 25% threshold, you have 25% less wage to have spent on. So the calculation of 100% or 95% or whatever that would be on your forgivable calculation is going to be applied to a smaller number. And this is the math logic that shows that a thought process of, well, I'll just wait till June 29th and hire everyone back, because the forgiveness calculation allows for that, but your spend in the middle will not have dollars applied to it because people weren't there in your payroll costs. So you might be able to borrow the loan based on the last year's average, but if you don't have the people during the loan forgiveness covered period, then there's no money to forgive. And hopefully that makes sense, because the idea is that you're keeping people on payroll, off unemployment, and getting the money to pay them is the intention of this loan.
So theoretically speaking, if you, let's say, kept, let's say, everybody, if you kept all this, if you had the same full-time equivalents, let's say, you will pass that criteria. Even if you lowered, let's say, their salaries by 24%, you lowered, let's say, their salaries by 24%, and you had, but you did not decrease the actual full-time equivalents, then you are forgiven that entire portion then. You are meeting the qualification for complete forgiveness then for the payroll portion of it.
Yeah, so your forgivable percent would be 100%. However, it's going to be 100% applied to a smaller number because you didn't have the expense in the middle.
I see. Okay.
So you're going to forgive less money. So the net effect of it is less money is going to be forgiven, not because of the the percent calculation, but because you didn't have the spend in the middle. You have to have the people and the wage during the 8-week period in order for it to be forgiven.
Is there a problem, Bob, if let's say a business owner, they were only drawing a K1, they were not W2. Is there a problem if, let's say, in that period of time until June 30th, if they put themselves as a W2 in the company and draw W2 salary to help meet the FTE equivalency number, as well as the money threshold? And also, I see here in the call, I know of a couple of people who have a whole bunch of kids. Some of them are older. Could they also employ their kids if they had to?
Okay. This gets a little complicated. So I'm a K1. I'm not a W2. I pay myself normally more than $100,000 a year. Because I'm an LLC, this is a kind of a little hole in the language, but the intent is pretty clear from putting other pieces together that I'm okay with including me in the loan amount at the $100,000 a year rate. So I get to add my $83.33 a month to my monthly calculation to determine my loan amount. Now we get into my spend. I can spend $83.33 a month on me and have that forgivable based on the forgiveness calculation. Now, when it gets to the forgiveness calculation, anyone who's an over $100,000 a year person is not included in the FTEs and the wage calculations. They're omitted from that. So there's no need to throw yourself in on that just to try to help the FTE, because you don't need to include yourself anyway. As far as adding people now, this is why you start with what's your prior 1 year average payroll cost. If people didn't exist in that prior 1 year, you don't have money to add up to qualify for a loan. So if they existed prior to this disaster, then they're going to be in the loan amount. If they only existed after, they're not going to be counted in your loan amount, but they would contribute to your FTE or your wage comparison calculation. So that you could have a scenario where somebody who was with you 3 months ago isn't with you now, but you've got somebody new with you now, and that can balance itself out.
Okay. Which period do we exactly use to determine average monthly payroll? Which period exactly is the 8-week comparison compared to?
The period to use for the loan amount on payroll cost is the average monthly amount for the prior 12 months. So you're going to need to get 12 months worth of your payroll costs as defined in their list. And I have some stuff I can send out on this. And then the 8-week period, the loan forgiveness covered period, which is the 8 weeks following the date of the loan, is the period of time that is used to determine the spend amount. The allowable use happens over that 8 weeks. So what you're basically doing is borrowing 2.5 times payroll cost, and you're going to spend it for 2 times. Mm-hmm. Right? You got 2 months on the spend, but you borrowed at 2.5. But in the spend, you got rent and utilities, which weren't in the loan amount calculation. So it's going to kind of work itself out where because you borrowed at 2.5 times payroll cost, when you add the rent and utility cost into your spend, you're still probably going to be covered. So I believe the bottom line of this is that to the extent that you maintained payroll and FTEs, you're going to have a larger spend, closer to 100% of what's borrowed, and it will be 100% forgiven. And so there's really two major things this all comes down to. One is a decision around relationship with your people, and believing or assuming that there's an end to this, and there will be an end. It's just a matter of when. Are you in a better position to have kept your employees attached to you in an employment relationship being paid under this loan versus unemployment where they're free to go and do and change jobs, do whatever they want? Are they gonna be there for you once your demand starts to come back up? That's a fundamental business logic that you need to think through. The other real key business logic here is not just, don't stop at determining the loan amount. That's the easy part. What this is all about is understanding cash flow and how you've got multiple variables here. You've got a starting bank balance. You've got a certain percent of your normal revenue that you're still getting, albeit some much closer to normal and some much less than normal, okay? And you've got your costs that you're carrying, which are part of the loan calculation, part of the forgiveness amount, the loan spend, but you got other operating expenses that exist besides those. Variable expenses related to the work that you perform, other fixed overhead that you might have that's that's not in any of this formula so far. And what you really have to do and know is how to translate all of this into cash flow projection. That's the real question, is at what point, based on all of these moving variables, will I run out of money? And so that's what I've built, okay, is a way to help you get to not just the simple calculation of loan amount. You don't need anybody for that. Just go into your payroll records, average monthly payroll cost for the last year, and you're there. You can get your loan. But you still haven't, as a business owner, gone through all of the work of deciding how far down the line does this loan get me? And at what point, based on what kind of revenue are you maintaining and what kind of cost do you still have, are you going to still be able to be cash flow positive? And so that's you have to think through the scenario and know and predict 2 months from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, what's my cash position going to be? And so what we created here, and Deanie's got a picture of it. I created with some help of some really, really smart, knowledgeable people that build these kinds of math models, a Google survey form that asks you every question that you're going to need to have an answer to in order to answer the cash flow question. And if you're interested, you can send me an email. I will, I'm not charging for this. I will then email you the form. You go through and fill out the entire form. And once it's complete, I get a notice through the Google Suite that the form's complete. We can then take your answers, plug it into this monstrosity of a mathematical Excel workbook that's been created around this with all these variables in it. And it will spit out a result that says, here's how much your loan amount is, here's how much your spend's gonna be, here's what your forgivable amount's gonna be, and here's what's gonna happen to cash flow based on your inputs around what you think is gonna happen to your revenue for the next and throughout the rest of the year. So you're going to build this model around one expected scenario, and then I can send that back to you and say, here's the math on the scenario that you completed the form for. And that should put you in a pretty good position of starting to think about, all right, this loan is only going to take me 3 months. It's going to take me to 6 months. I better try to maintain revenue at a higher rate than I expected. What could I do? That's where diagnostics comes in, telehealth, virtual services, other things. I can tell you the bottom line of this entire crazy situation we're all in is that to the extent you have revenue to keep, keep it. To the extent that you can add new revenue streams, add it. To the extent that you can keep your people, keep them. And because you will be allowed to make a decision 8 weeks from now to cut staff without penalty, that does cost you money today to make that decision. It won't cost you then. It will cost you now, unless they extend the timeframes on this and come up with more money, which they very well may do, because I can tell you, I totally believe that $349 billion isn't enough to get every 500 and under employer over the hump. It's gonna get you 8 weeks. And over the next 8 weeks, a lot's gonna change. And you're gonna be in a lot better position in 8 weeks to make decisions strategically about what you do with your people than you are today. And people have reacted, and that's what you do as business owners, is you try to react and say, hey, these are the cards I got on the table right now. What am I going to do? And some have decided to cut people. Great. No problem. But I believe the math says and suggests that the faster you bring them back, the better. As far as this loan is concerned, I believe that's also true in terms of the relationship with your people. The loan's designed to pay you to keep them off unemployment. And then in 8 weeks, you'll know what's going on with your visit volume. You'll know what's the condition of the escalation, or are we over, or has the curve been flattened, right? There's gonna be a lot of data 8 weeks from now that we can only project and guess about today. And so I can help you with analysis on a specific set of circumstances that you would like to see what it looks like. What I can't do for you for free, and I don't even know if I could do it for anyway, even if I was to charge for it, is for you to then say, well, tell me the 25 different possible scenarios that exist that this math model could actually calculate. I just wouldn't have time to give you every possible scenario. You have to think through what you think your likely scenario is. I'll tell you how that translates into math. And then you can look at those and then decide, hey, I'm gonna need more revenue. Or, you know what, I might need to cut some staff at this point. You know, I might need to borrow some more money, right? Maybe you got a line of credit that you could tap in. Does it make sense for me to do that? Will it take me to the other side of the problem? So there's lots of strategy and you know, just best guesses that we can do right now, and I'll help you evaluate one scenario. So all I need is in that form is also, in the beginning of it is essentially a disclaimer and a confidentiality agreement. The form itself says, I'm holding all this confidential. I'm not sharing any of your information with anybody. And so we're just going to use it to try to get a sense for what people are really going to think is going to happen. In aggregate, there could be some valuable information that comes out of getting 100 or 200 of these forms completed. So it's just an aid.
Bob, thank you. And there are other questions here, but I would like to just point out also something that, and I've been saying this all along, all right? It is with what we know as a business and with what we do as a business, we are implementing right now 5 different mitigation strategies, okay? So what are these strategies? I'm gonna just mention them very quickly. Strategy number 1 is decreasing expenses, okay? That is important. Strategy number 2, putting through the application and getting as much money as possible from this, because liquidity is what will get you through this, okay? You need liquidity. The more cash you have right now, the better it is. Also, if you don't use the money or all of the money, you can give them back without a penalty. And even if, because we're making a huge deal, of course, for the forgiveness, and the forgiveness is very important, but let's say that you had to pay back some portion of it. The portion you'll have to pay back, it will be at a low interest rate. I have even heard, and I don't know if this is correct, they say definitely 4% or less, but I heard something today that it might even be 0.5%. But again, I don't take this for granted. This is something that I heard, I read it actually, it said 0.5% paid over 2 years, not 10 years. But the individual SBAs will have the ability to change that if they want to. So this is information that I just heard. So these are 2 of the 5 mitigation strategies. Now, what is the third mitigation strategy? That we have made the decision under very specific measures we are taking, we are still open. We are maintaining our facilities open with much, much less production. Nevertheless, there is production. That's number 3. Not everybody does that or can do that, but we can. Mitigation strategy number 4, telehealth. We are doing telehealth and we are increasing rapidly our numbers on telehealth. Mitigation strategy number 5, we are doing diagnostics, and we're not only doing diagnostics in our office, we are doing intensely diagnostics in medical offices, for medical offices that are still operating, that are still open, like internal medicine, family practice, and endocrinology offices. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. The first 2 mitigation strategies, cutting expenses and getting money in, that's great, they are great, but they don't do one thing. They do not include production. You're not producing anything. And think about this as a concept. If as a nation, if as a planet, we stop production and we only try to get money, the resources will end at some point. Production is important. So the cutting expenses and getting this liquid money, we get it under the business viewpoint of we're going to use this so that we can improve our future production and operations in the near future when all this is going to be said and done. We're improving internal processes, we're improving our EMR systems, we are improving our communication programs, our relationships with patients, we're improving all that stuff. So this is the strategy that you use while you try to maintain as much of your current production as possible in various means, whether it's called tele-PT, whether it's called keeping your doors open, or whether it's called venturing into the area of diagnostic testing. So that is what I can share with you before we move into some more questions.
I agree 100%. One just qualifier on cutting expenses, that in the short term, you know, cutting payroll expenses counts against you in terms of forgivable amount on your loan.
Yeah.
It doesn't count against you on loanable amount, but it counts against you on forgivable amount, which then means you'll have more of a loan to pay back. So one little qualifier on cutting expenses, that anywhere that you could cut expenses that's not allowable use expense works to your advantage. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I should have said that we are not cutting expenses of those that would be forgivable, and as a matter of fact, we kind of use it as a tool of relationships with the people that we don't cut those expenses. As a number 2, we are not cutting our marketing. Our marketing is pretty much the same, or I would say in some cases just a little more. We're doing a little more marketing right now. There is a confusion on how to calculate the FTEs. How do you calculate the FTEs? Because there are changes on the FTEs. How will they ask us to calculate all this? And how will they verify all this too?
So they're not going to verify. First of all, calculating 40 hours a week is 1 FTE. Just use that. 2,080 hours a year is 1 FTE. So you're going to be comparing not exact time frame periods before and after, right? So you could pick February 15th to June 30th, 2019 as your FTE comparison period, or you could pick January, February of this year as your FTE comparison period. But everybody has an FTE essentially per pay period, really is the way the world works, right? You have payroll, you have pay periods. But just take your, so might be a little bit of a math, exercise you have to convert pay period time to week time, right? So go from pay period, are you a every 2 week pay, right? 24 pays? Are you a 26 pay, right? Go from the number of days in your pay period and the hours in your pay period. So divide hours, total hours in pay period by the number of days in the pay period. Get an hours per day, multiply by 5. Now you're at hours per week. Compare that number to 40. That would be your FTE. And then it's, you're going to compare FTEs essentially on June 30th to either January, February of this year or February 15th to June 30th of last year. And that's going to be your FTE based calculation on loan forgiveness.
And how are they going to verify all of these numbers, the FTEs before and after? They're going to ask us for documentation and all that. I mean,
so there's going to be a forgiveness application. Okay, and then they're going to ask questions on the back end about what happened during the loan forgiveness covered period, the 8 weeks after the loan. So it's unclear as to how much data they're going to request. Are they going to want your payroll records? They don't want any of it on the front end. You don't have to give tax returns, financial statements, none of this stuff. You just give them a number, and you're going to certify the number's true. Okay? And on the back end, on the forgiveness application, it's probably going to be something similar. That I don't think that the practical application of this is going to turn into this massive accounting exercise, that has to happen on June 30th in order to figure out what's forgivable. So we don't know with 100% certainty exactly how that's going to look on the back end, but there is an actual forgiveness application process that then they'll process quickly. The more complicated it is, the less quickly they can calculate it. So I don't think it's going to be complicated.
Thank you. Before we answer more questions, I would like to give a reminder that Bob, Mary Dualong, and 2 of the executives of Bob's practice will be joining me tonight at a 6 p.m. Eastern Time webinar where we are going to talk about the billing and the regulations around telehealth. So you'll find out everything about billing and the regulations. You can go to savephysicaltherapy.com, savephysicaltherapy.com, and you can register for that. It will be really a very well attended webinar we're doing tonight. Before we move on with more questions, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, before this town hall meeting, which is at 1 p.m. Eastern, I will be speaking at the SSI Client Nation group. So Tim, can you just brief people a little bit about the group and the solutions?
Yes, Dimi. This is a roundtable group. So each week we try to get a number of owners that have had success. It's all solution oriented, obviously. Today's presentation, a lot of the town hall presentations that I've been a member at, They're incredibly helpful, useful. This is more of, okay, what have owners specifically done? What are some solutions that they have used in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that sort of thing. So anybody's welcome to come. Go to SSI Client Nation. It's a Facebook page. It's a private group. We open it up to anybody. You don't have to know survival strategies or anything like that. Just join. And we've been hosting these roundtables every Monday and Thursday at 8 o'clock Pacific time, 11 o'clock Eastern time. And you're just welcome to come. You can just listen. We can participate. You know, we'll get 150, 150, whatever happens to be. But it's been well received. People really like it. We provide tools that are used in different circumstances. These are very challenging times, obviously. So data's great, but having some tools to facilitate this is also really, really helpful. And Demi, you and I know, we met, gosh, 20 some years ago working on specific tools that you've used successfully over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hope to see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you, Tim. I'll be there myself. One of the questions, Bob, that they're coming through, and this is actually from one of the HUD's partners. Right now, she's in a specific situation where she had to close down 2 specific practices because the regulation was such. These practices are within a gym, so she was mandated to shut them down, right? So that happened. Now she does have the money to carry through for a period of time, let's say the rent and all that, right? So she says, should she delay to apply for the PPP loan until she's allowed to reopen her practices again, or the money is going to run out?
You know, we don't know if and when the money's going to run out, how fast.
350 billion, that's it.
Yeah, I've never spent that much money, so I don't know how long it takes to spend it. But you know, it's I think the answer. So I would look at it like this. Let's say I was able to get a loan a week from today. I don't know what date it is anymore. The 1st, right? Yeah, I'm still waiting for somebody to say April Fools, and this whole thing just goes away. So April 8th, I have a loan. Now, I'm not really operational. So what's going to happen is my spend period is not going to be much, right? So I'm not spending money on allowable uses. And so the clock starts running on that 8-week loan forgiveness covered period that when you get your loan. So what you would have in that scenario, if your reopening is delayed, let's say 2-3 months later, you would just have a low interest 10-year amortization loan that's unsecured that you didn't have to guarantee. And you still have cash for whenever you do reopen. That's one way to look at it. So it's a good source of financing that technically there's no recourse, even if you don't ever pay the loan back anyway, right? I mean, I'm not suggesting that everybody default on their loan, but these are unsecured loans. The idea is that if you can have a big forgivable percentage of it, great, because you are operating and spending. But if you don't, it doesn't even necessarily mean you will pay it back anyway. But I mean, that said, you know, if you delay the borrowing to match the 8-week loan forgiveness covered period to when you're actually spending, then the risk is, are there funds available? And nobody can answer that question today. I did see a question in the chat about the FTE comparison period. You're calculating FTEs during the 8 weeks after the loan and comparing it to either January and February or February 15th through June 30th of last year.
Okay. Guys, thank you very much for attending. This was very interesting. These town hall meetings are supposed to be 30-minute long. We are close to an hour right now, so I'm gonna close the meeting. We'll be here with you tomorrow again at 1 p.m. Eastern. As I said, tonight we're gonna have the telehealth meeting. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Bob. Awesome job. Tim, thank you for helping. It's awesome, and for your information. And we'll see you all later tonight and tomorrow.
Thank you,
Take
Dean.
care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.